めぐみ、これ持ってて。これを菊水庵Kikufuku。仙台名物超うまい。僕のおすすめはずんだ生クリーム味。
Kikufuku from Jujutsu Kaisen. But before you get ready to eat any demon or cursed fingers, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, Into the AM. It's a men's fashion line aimed at making you look good while feeling super comfortable. I've recently been wearing their gear to work out with, and it is amazingly comfortable to work out in while working up a sweat to get ready to fight any cursed demons or whatever you got laying around. Probably cats. They have plenty of really awesome designs on their website, and the best part is that they're having an insane deal just for you guys. With their Black Friday sale coming up, they're going to offer an additional 20% to the Chefpk community where you can get 40% off of your entire order. 40%! They're literally giving you stuff away for free at this point. I don't know about you guys, but I can at least use like 3 or 4 more sweatpants. Whether or not you're hanging out with your cats or getting a full workout in, head to intotheam.com/chefpk and use Chefpk at checkout for that 40% off. Now, for Kikufuku. That word is so naughty. The first thing we need to make for this mochi is the edamame filling. Now there are 2 different types of filling, but we're going to start with this one first. In a small pot, add in 200 grams worth of shelled edamame, followed by 50 grams worth of granulated sugar and a nice heavy pinch of salt. The salt is going to help offset the sweetness. Now we're going to bring this entire thing over to the stove, and when we bring it over to the stove, we want to have it over about a medium heat. The way you're going to cook this is very similar to a red bean paste filling. So you don't want to add in too much liquid at first, just making sure that you use the residual liquid from those edamame beans to start melting all of that sugar and salt together. Once you have all of the sugar and salt slightly dissolved onto the edamame, this is when we're going to add in our water. I'm adding in enough water to slightly cover up that edamame, which came out to about 100 milliliters for myself. Now we do have to cook this over that medium heat for quite a while, so while that's cooking, we're going to make our pastry cream. You're going to need 340 milliliters worth of whole milk, but only add in about 2/3 of it to your pot. To your milk, add in 50 grams worth of sugar, a nice heavy pinch of salt, and then 1 cap full of vanilla. Now give this a little whisk and then bring this over to the heat. All we really want to do is dissolve that sugar mixture and heat up the milk just a little bit. You don't want this to scald, so make sure you pay attention to it. My milk only went for about 5 or 6 minutes over that medium heat. Now in a separate heat-proof bowl, add in the rest of your milk, followed by 18 grams worth of cornstarch, 8 grams worth of all-purpose flour, 2 egg yolks set at room temperature, and then just give this a little bit of a whisk. You want to make sure you whisk this enough so that way the cornstarch and the flour fully incorporate themselves with all the liquid, but you don't want to whisk it so much that you start aerating any of your liquid. Now grab your hot milk mixture and slowly, ever so slowly, begin pouring in the hot milk into the cold mixture down below. You want to do this so you start to temper those eggs so you don't end up with scrambled eggs. Once you have that all combined, place this back into your pot, bring this over to the stove, and now we're going to be cooking this over a very low medium heat. The reason why you want to go slow and low is because this can cook very quickly. Mine only took about 5 or 6 minutes to start setting up, and you can see how quickly this starts to thicken up. This pastry cream will thicken up even more as we cool it down, so you want to make sure you don't cook this too long. Once you have a nice creamy consistency and texture, go ahead and remove it from your pot and place it into your bowl of choice. Now we do have to do one more thing to this, and that is add in the small 25-gram dab of butter. I should have added this in right when it was in the pot, but I kind of forgot, so the residual heat from this is actually going to help melt this down. Now since we are making this today, go ahead and place your pastry cream in an ice bath. Make sure you keep a spoon in there to constantly stir it every couple of minutes, and this is going to help cool it down. Now our edamame is actually done. Once you see that there's just a small amount of liquid left in the bottom of that pot, take all of your edamame and place it into your blender or food processor of choice. I'm using my little dinky food processor here, which is probably not the best choice, but it's all I really have for something this small. You can see it does take some time to start blending this and pureeing it, but once it's done, you should end up with somewhat of a nice smooth paste of edamame. This is nice and thick already, even though it is still really warm, but I wanted to see if I could extract any further liquid out of the edamame, so I went ahead and took this out and put it back in the pot, threw it back on the stove over a very low heat, and just tried to agitate it a little bit to try to remove any excess moisture. This didn't really remove any extra moisture from it, and the consistency stayed more or less the same, so you could probably just skip this step. Now take all of your edamame and place this into another bowl, making sure that you do scrape all that good off of there. Now remove the pastry cream, which should be cooled by now from its ice bath, placing in your edamame into that same ice bath so you could be super efficient and not have to make a second one. Now once they're both cooled down, place them into the fridge so that way they're going to be ready to go for when we start assembling these things. So now to make our mochi. For this, we're going to take 100 grams worth of granulated sugar and add in about 225 milliliters worth of water, reserving the other 225 milliliters for later. Bring this over to the stove and start dissolving that sugar. Now take the other half of your water and place that into a heat-proof bowl, microwave-proof bowl, and take 225 grams worth of Mochiko, which is sweet glutinous rice flour, and place that into that water. Give this a little bit of a whisk and it's going to turn into these little bit of a clumpy boy, but don't worry too much about it. You're just trying to hydrate this slightly so that way you can introduce the other liquid in just a minute. Once that sugar has dissolved, go ahead and remove it from the stove and pour it into the first batch. You're going to be able to whisk this a little bit, but you want to make sure that you do break down all of that glutinous rice flour. If you don't, when you go to microwave this, you're going to end up with giant clumps of rice flour that's just not going to work out. Now throw your lid on it, making sure it is not sealed if you're using this method, and place it in the microwave on high heat for 3.5 minutes. After those 3.5 minutes, break this up just a little bit with a whisk if possible, making sure that the whisk or the spatula has a little bit of water on it. The water is going to prevent any sticking from happening to the spatula or the whisk that you're using. Place the lid back on and place this in for another 3.5 minutes on that high heat. Now do the same thing, making sure you fold everything back in, making sure there aren't any parts that haven't been exposed to that heat. You can see how sticky this is getting. Now one more time, this is the third round at 3.5 minutes on high heat in the microwave, and you can see just how beautiful and gelatinous this is. Now grab yourself a sheet tray and line it with parchment paper, sprinkle it with just a little bit of cornstarch, and making sure that it is spread out as evenly as possible. Then take all of your hot mochi and place this onto that sheet tray. You want to do this so that way you can work with it later, because if you try to work with it now, you're just going to end up burning your fingertips off. Once you've spread it out to as much as you could, go ahead and place this into the fridge for about 15 minutes so it cools down a little bit. I ended up wrapping mine with just a little bit of plastic, which was a mistake because the plastic stuck pretty hard. Now to cut the mochi, I'm using a pizza cutter. Make sure there's a little bit of cornstarch on that pizza cutter and cut off a small piece of your mochi. This is going to make it a lot easier to work with. Once you have your mochi piece cut, place this onto a cornstarch dusted cutting board and go ahead and cut this into smaller pieces. Now when you roll this out, make sure you use a significant amount of cornstarch. And the reason for that is you can see how hard this sticks to my rolling pin without that cornstarch being dusted really heavily on that mochi. The stuff that stuck to my rolling pin is honestly a casualty of war in the kitchen, so we went ahead and started with another piece of mochi. This time I dusted it really heavily with cornstarch, and after rolling it to about 1/8 of an inch of thickness, I went ahead and cut it with a 3.5 inch ring mold. This gives you a really beautiful piece of mochi to work with. Now I went ahead and did this several times after this, making sure that I was able to roll this out properly with the proper amount of cornstarch. I ended up cutting out about 7 portions worth of my mochi. You do have a lot of mochi left over, so if you really want to, you can cut this recipe in half and be totally fine. Now move the cutting board aside in the most awkward way possible, because Paul, you should have just put down that other cutting board and then grabbed your grippy thing from the other one and then placed your cutting board down. I don't know why you do stuff like this. Now grab yourself a little bit of plastic wrap and place this over your cutting board. This is going to be where we start assembling the filling for our mochi. Take a small spoonful worth of your edamame filling, place that about 3 to 4 inches away from the next portion. This is going to allow you to start portioning out all of your filling. Once you have all of your filling placed out, press this down with a spoon, realize that using the spoon is a bad idea, and get your fingers wet and really get in there spreading this out. You want to make sure you only spread this out to about 2 inches or so that way it doesn't fill up the mochi too much. I ended up using all of the edamame filling for this, making sure that I split it as evenly as possible. Now grab yourself a little bit of your pastry cream and place that directly into the middle of that mochi. Remember, you want about half the amount of pastry cream as you used for the actual edamame. Now cut the little square around that filling and slowly start to try to bring that filling together. What you're really trying to do is encapsulate the pastry cream with that edamame, making sure that there are no exposed portions of your pastry cream. This took a little bit of practice, but by the end of it, I was left with this really nice piece of edamame filling. Take that edamame and pastry cream filling and place it into the center of your mochi, using a little bit of water on your fingers to help bring that mochi together. I kind of folded this over similar to how I would a dumpling, and it seemed to hold really well together as long as you had enough water on your fingers for that mochi. Once you give it a little bit of a squeeze, you have this really beautiful fresh mochi that's filled with that edamame and that pastry cream. This does take quite a bit of practice and took me a while to figure out, but after the second or third one, I felt like I had a good rhythm for how to roll this mochi. I was able to get these really beautiful tight fillings on top of not having any exposed bits in the middle. I grabbed myself a brush, brushing off any any excess cornstarch from those actual mochi fillings from the inside because I didn't do that with the first one. And after an undisclosed amount of time, I had all of my beautiful mochi balls. Now you can absolutely eat these right away, but since I was gonna wait till later, I went ahead and wrapped each of them individually with plastic. This is going to help keep them fresh in the fridge and just place them into any kind of airtight container. Later on, before Halloween night, I removed one from the fridge after about 3 or 4 hours, and using a very sharp knife that still had everything stick, I revealed my beautiful edamame and pastry cream Kikufuku mochi from Jujutsu Kaisen. That's a mouthful. There it is, guys, the Kikufuku mochi from Jujutsu Kaisen. Now, information on this was kind of hard to find, and I kind of went off of my instinct on making this, but I know things like Daifuku mochi exists, where you can find like a strawberry wrapped with mochi and things like that. But these are definitely a thing. It's just really hard to find information about it. So if anybody knows any info, let me know in the comments down below. This is my version of it. It looks really nice. The texture looks really good as well. Like everything held together really nicely. Cheers. Oh, it's so good. It's like a very subtle sweetness, very subtle creaminess, a little bit of salt from the actual edamame because we did season that really nicely. And then the textural differences, you have the chewy mochi, then kind of the granular edamame, and then the really, really creamy pastry cream. This is really good. Abu, do you want some? Let me know what your favorite style of mochi is. I love this style, and I love savory mochi. If you want to support the channel directly, check out Patreon or buy my books down below. My name is Chefpk. Get subscribed, and remember, keep playing with your food. I love it. It's so good. Abu, we have a princess to save.